Hey guys, today we are doing another ceiling drywall repair. A patch like this is going to pay around 300 and I don't know, 300 to 350, somewhere in there. I did it for my cousin, so I did it much cheaper. First thing we're going to do, we're going to cut out a nice, beautiful square and cut out all the damaged drywall. It's extremely important when you cut drywall out that you know exactly what's behind that drywall. Just imagine if you hit a water line or an electrical line, it would be a nightmare to have that situation on your hands. So always get your fingers up there and just feel what's behind it. If most of this patch were covered and it was just damaged, I would cut out a little hole and kind of get my fingers up there to make sure I wasn't cutting in anything or to make sure I could see what's up there. I like to use a router, that was that green tool I used, and the oscillator tool, I call it a jiggler. That's the one I am using now. You could also just take your knife, your blade, and just cut it that way. It just kind of takes forever and it's annoying. So these tools just make it go really fast. And basically I'm just trying to cut a nice clean square so I can put a nice clean square up in it. Once I have everything cut out, I like to reinforce the old drywall with just additional screws. Sometimes there aren't screws in that area, so the old drywall potentially could be kind of floppy where you cut out. So always add a couple extra screws to the wood area in the old drywall. And if you notice, really cool, I didn't time lapse this video. So this video, is 40 minutes long. Well worth the watch if you want to watch the whole thing, but 40 minutes it took me how to do this. And again, it was 300 to 350, right? So that's pretty good. The only thing I didn't film is the dry time. I used 5-minute mud for this, but I did let each layer dry 10 or 15 minutes. I was just kind of chatting with my cousin, and so I just kind of let each layer dry a little longer. But I could have got this done in, I don't know, 2 hours. I'm measuring here for the length of backing I need to cut. It's always best to kind of overlap it so it is inside. See how I stuck it inside there? So you kind of have two sides of that corner to screw to. It just gives the backing extra strength and prevents cracking. You don't want to go crazy with screws, but you know, every 1 to 2 inch, you probably want to just put a screw up there. If you were to go nuts and do them like right on top of each other, the drywall would lose its strength. So, you know, just 3 or 4 or 5 screws in backing should be enough. Do you see how pretty much on every corner or every side of that square there's a piece of wood? Almost. So basically, I don't need to cut this piece of drywall exactly. It doesn't need to be an exact fit. It could even be as much as a 1/2 inch off, honestly, probably even more, because pre-fill will solve that problem. So what I'm doing here is I'm just measuring to get a new piece of drywall up. And look at that, like camera magic, it just appeared out of nowhere. So if you look on the left, kind of the top left, there's a pretty good gap there, right? And just kind of all over, there's just kind of weird large gaps. Don't overthink it, it just doesn't matter at all. because the step we're going to do after this is pre-fill, and that will solve any gaps that we have. You know, guys, comment about a drywall project that you have helped with, have done, and whether it went really well or maybe it didn't and it was kind of hilarious looking. I'd love to hear from you. When I was first starting doing this kind of stuff, I mean forever ago, I did some terrible looking patches and they were hilarious. But I'm pretty good at it now. So same thing with screw pattern. You really don't want to go crazy with it. Just maybe 2, 3 at most on each side of that square for a size like this. But honestly, you just want to get it up there and screw it tight. Although every step is extremely important, this step is also extremely important. We are prepping for pre-fill. So basically what I'm doing is I'm cutting off any loose or ruffled pieces of damaged drywall, whether that's on the old side or even the new side if there's a ruffled piece. I'll zoom up here in just a moment. But that's what I'm doing now. We're just cutting out kind of a small triangle on all the damaged areas to get everything nice and smooth. I film on the GoPro Hero 7, and on the front of it, there's a tiny little screen that shows you data of how many minutes or seconds you've recorded. So that's kind of why I stare at the camera, because I'm just double checking to make sure that it's still on, because that would be silly if I missed some footage. All right, here is a close-up of the pre-fill. And if you notice on the outside corner or outside edge of each of those cuts is extremely smooth. I'm not talking about the middle there, but the outside of each of those cuts is cut extremely smooth. So when I put mud up there and I wipe it, the ruffled paper or the damaged areas don't hold my knife back. So I get a nice heavy glob on the tip of my blade, and I kind of wipe it at an angle. That's kind of a You may not be good enough to do that, but that's fine. But we're just shoving it up in those gaps really heavily, so it fills all those spaces, and then we wipe it really tight so there is nothing left on the wall. Basically, it's just the mud inside. Inside corners are a little different, but basically the same. It's hard to kind of wipe it in there, so I just kind of get some on my knife and then I shove it inside there, if you kind of watch me do that. And then I just kind of wipe it tight. And again, I don't want any excess mud on the outside of the wall. I just want this particular mud on the inside of any gaps. All right, we have a close-up of prefill. Do you see on the old drywall and the new drywall, there is very, very little mud there because I wiped it as tight as possible, and that is a perfect prefill. So from here, I used 5-minute mud, so obviously that dries very quickly. But even if you just used all-purpose or something, you can move right into tape coat right after prefill. You don't need to wait. On all repairs, it is crucial that you use meshed tape because the old drywall or even the new drywall has the potential of being damaged. What meshed tape does is if it's damaged and it tries to bubble, mesh tape will hide those bubbles. If you use paper tape, those bubbles potentially would come through, and you obviously don't want that. So just all repairs, just used meshed tape. Mesh tape is generally fairly sticky on one side, so that's kind of why it's sticking to the wall. But again, you don't need to wait at all for this very first finishing coat. You can move right into it after the prefill. So I generally like to hit the corners first so the tape doesn't peel on me. And then I just kind of glob it up there to get some material on the wall to work with. But we're going to treat this very first layer similar to prefill. I'm not really trying to leave excess mud on this patch. I am just trying to kind of wipe it all, wipe the edges first, and then wipe the middle of it. So basically all of the mud is gone. There's just a tiny, tiny thin layer over the tape so it doesn't peel off on me for the next layer. With all drywall, really in general, you don't want high points or low points. Meaning, I bet if you pause the video right now and kind of stare at your walls, you can see a bump somewhere from a seam or a divot. If you really look, I bet you can find them. So you don't want those, especially in patches, because you don't want to know there was ever a patch there. So generally speaking, where you put the tape is a high point. So you want to add as little mud to that high point as you have to. So each layer, the high point, has the least amount of mud, just a microscopic layer. And then the fill, which we'll talk about shortly, is on either side of that high point. Right, this is an up close of the first coat on top of the tape. Again, if you notice, it's wiped extremely tight. There's no globbing. The ripples I don't care about. See those tiny ripples? I do not care about those. You're not going to get rid of them on the first attempt. This is the fill we're talking, okay? See the light? That needs to become mud. Because we want a flat wall. That's fairly flat, but again, we can do better than that. Right, so this is the fill. The high point is where that tape is. See that? How there's no light right where the tape is? That's a pretty good one, but still we can do better, right? So you always, between every single layer, you keep checking your fill. I do not sand between layers. If there's a weird spot, I take my knife and kind of scrape it like that, but I don't sand between layers. Oh, that was just a piece of tape that was left over, and that happens with mesh tape. So we're starting our third layer, so pre-fill, tape, right? Tape, the one we just showed you, and then this one, third. So however you want to look at it. So here, I'm spending a little more attention trying to address those fills we just talked about. Now again, this layer, it's not going to be perfect. There's still going to be fills, there's still going to be ripples, but this layer is going to look just a little bit better than the layer before, and the fills are going to be a little bit less. I always start each layer by just getting a ton of mud up there. You see how thick and globby it is? That way it's on top of the wall and I have material to work with. Now I can wipe it off to the depth that I want, because I remember where it needs to be thicker and where it needs to be thinner, correct? Right? We just went over that. So that's what I've done there. I've globbed it. I'm wiping the edges tight because you always want that extremely feathered. And then I'm applying pressure as needed to address each one of those fills. Whenever you start a new stroke, like a wipe, you want to start off of the mud, whether that be in the inside corner, like I'm doing right there, or on the old, already dried drywall. If you start right in the middle, you will create a line, and you will have to go back and re-wipe it anyway because there'll be a weird line. And if you're doing a patch, kind of try that out. Start a brand new wipe kind of in the middle there somewhere, and you'll see that, oh, a weird line was created. So you always just kind of want to pay attention to that because you don't want those. I muted the background noise for this particular clip. I was just chatting with my cousin, and it kind of didn't really relate to the video, so I didn't want to have you guys hear that. I think I may have said it earlier, but in this patch I'm using 5-minute quickset. That is for, do not use 5-minute quickset unless you are just a pro with drywall, because you'll be sad. And honestly, don't use any quickset of any kind, it's that powder in the bag, unless you're pretty good at drywall. Even the 90-minute mud can get away with you. Maybe you need to go and take a phone call, or you've stopped to eat, and then you come back and your pan is a thing of cement. Because quickset dries extremely, extremely hard, and once it dries, you can't get it wet again. Like regular mud, if it dries, you get it wet, it'll turn back into a liquid. But quickset does not, so just be careful when you use it. I'm spending a little extra attention here, really getting the outside edges feathered, because you always want those extremely flat. Because first off, I don't want to sand, as you know, I want to sand as little as possible because it's annoying. And secondly, if you have a step there like a glob and then back to the old drywall, you're going to see that step, and you don't want that because you want to make sure this patch isn't noticeable. Right? So if we see here, it's extremely flat. The ripples are a little less than the last coat, right? And we're a little bit more smoother, a little bit more nicer than the other coat. We still have several to go. Now the fill, remember that one? There was a little bit more light. So each fill, you're slowly going to get better and better. That one looks decent. It was better than the other one. Ooh, that still needs quite a bit. Ooh, that one looks real good. All right, this is the 4th quick set finishing coat, right? So we needed in that kind of corner, that was the largest fill, so that's why I globbed it really heavy there. And I'm just getting material on the wall to work with. So we're just kind of globbing it up there, and then I'll start doing my wipes to address each one of those fills. Generally speaking, I start with my edges first, where I kind of bend the knife and taper out the outside edge, because I need that flat regardless. And then I work with fills, right? So that particular area on the inside there, right here, was the biggest need. So that I'm wiping lighter because that needs the most mud. All right, so here I am checking my fill again. So you just put your knife up to the wall and you're checking for light. And this one turned out fantastic. If you've made it this far in the video, I just want to say thanks for sticking around so long. The view time is very important to the YouTube algorithm, and it helps push my videos out to other audiences. My channel is all about how to make a ton of extra money, how to save money, and how to budget properly. A lot of my videos are patches, because that's how I make a bulk of my income. However, I do have other videos on cooking, on how to save on specific meals, and then other ways to make money. As I was saying before, I used 5-minute quick set for all the fills and pre-fill. The final layer, I like to use topping. You can get it at Home Depot or Lowe's, I believe. And it's just a much smoother mud. Paint takes to it very well, and you can just get very flat and crisp wipes with this. So if you can tell, it's a little bit more brown, and the color kind of helps pick out lines too. But anyway, basically what I'm doing, the wall is perfectly flat, and I am just getting a super thin layer up on the wall, so we just have the topping coat everywhere. This topping coat takes the longest to dry, so I generally put a fan on it, and about 15 to 20 minutes or so, and it is able to wet sand, and then you can texture on top of it. soon. Okay, all the fills are completed. I'm going to let this dry and then I'll sand out those ripples and a few imperfections you might see. So we'll sand it out so it's perfectly flat. But isn't that cool? Very interesting. I'm going to let this dry again 15-20 minutes and then I'll sand it. But guys, don't be afraid to do this yourself. I mean, whether you just have a leak in your house or you're trying to make extra money. Something like this, I spent longer because I was just chatting with my cousin, but I could have had done in maybe maybe 3 hours, and charged anywhere from $3 to $3.50 for it. And that's just kind of the going rate for something like this. That's not overpriced and probably not underpriced. Some might even charge more. When sanding, the most crucial part is you do the edge. See how I'm sanding where the old and new meet? Those ripples in that step has to be feathered out so it's a smooth transition. You don't want to see a step with the transition. Yes, sanding the middle and making that smooth is important, but if you had to just pick, I could just sand the edge of that entire patch, and odds are you wouldn't notice any imperfections in the middle. But that step you will notice every time. So that outer shell of it has to be perfectly feathered. I've gotten this question before, so I'll just answer it. But inside the patch, do you see the straight white line? That's where the patch is. That's not a step or a bump. That is where the new piece of drywall was, and it's drying at a different rate. So it appears to be a step or a bump or something like that, but it's just because it's drying differently, so it appears differently. Once it's dry, you won't ever notice. After sanding, I noticed a very few tiny imperfections that I will need to just add a tiny bit of mud to, and that's called a skim coat. There was a hole there, and then just kind of a straight line over there. That's going to sand out. But anyway, so yeah, don't be afraid to add even just a tiny little bit of mud if you need to. And this is a skim coat. I don't need to re-sand this situation. I'm just going to wipe it tight, and then that will fix those tiny little issues we just pointed out. This texture was a little bit hard to match. It was just kind of blobby a little bit. But anyway, basically what I did to try to match it, on the hopper, I set it to the highest setting so a ton of mud would come out. So that way I could give it some kind of knockdown / orange peel type look that it kind of is. So I'm going to put a ton of blobs up there, then I'm going to re-wipe it with my knife. I'll spray it again and then re-wipe it. And this one turned out decent for matching. Did you notice the two little blobs I took off? Those were like hardened pieces of drywall, and if I would have left those up there and wiped it, it would have caused like a streak in the texture, and obviously that is not good. So obviously the goal is to match the previous texture. This I am wiping extremely, extremely lightly. There's very little pressure on the ceiling. All right, these are the final results. Let's take a look. That's the original. Kind of memorized that, what that looks like. And now we're looking at that. I think that looks pretty darn close to the original. What do you guys think? Comment below and tell me how you think I did. Also, please share this video with your friends. My channel is all about how to make a ton of extra money, save a ton of money, and budget properly. I offer a ton of other videos besides drywall on how to make money. In the future, I will post other videos on different ways to make money as well. Again, please hit like and subscribe to this channel.